Almost
I
payback
would
time.
I would never light you up, Leroy. I would never do that. Well, at least not when you're around and can get me back. But the last time, yeah, it was rough. It was a rough technology day. Look at that.
Hmm.
Even now, like everybody's name's on there except what? For your name.
Of
Why?
mine.
Because you are causing trouble. And there it goes. There, I got your name, Leroy.
I just think you're trying to gaslight me. You're trying to make me look bad, man. I don't know.
I don't have to do that. You do that on your own, man. All right. Hey, everyone, we're live. We're just a little pre-show banter here. We are off the cuff, and you guys are hopefully watching. I actually see we got a few people online already. They are excited for Frank, Shu here, and matter of fact, who do I got here? I got Jade. You can see she's excited to see you, Frank. She's got her message up here and was cheering for you, rooting for you. So we've got some of your folks from social media who are already jumping on board and ready to see how we do today on the show. So appreciate you, Frank, for joining us. So let me introduce, by the way. So let's get started here. Let me introduce you guys. Um, so Leroy and myself, as you guys know, we are the regular hosts here for Off the Cuff, and today our guest is Frank Shu, and he's gonna talk a little bit about his work to equip parents really how to push back against activists in their local school boards. I know a lot of us have experienced some concern with what we're seeing happening in the education of our children and sort of the radicalization, I guess you could say, of what's happening, but also just the miseducation from many of us, at least from our perspective, what we see happening. But Frank is the president of Californians for Equal Rights Foundation, and that's primarily where he's doing his educational piece with local people here in San Diego. But he's also the co-founder for San Diego Asian Americans for Equality. So, welcome, Frank. Anything you want to say? Introduce yourself. Anything I should add there before we move forward?
Hey, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Leroy, to have me here today. Yeah, I think pretty extensive introduction, and I'm also a father of two kids, one 16-year-old boy and another 13-year-old girl.
Yeah. So you care about all these issues, the education issues as well. We'll get into that, dive into that. By the way, Kevin's on there. Hey, Kevin, it's good to hear from you, brother. So he's watching live here. So there's a lot of interest we know in this topic. So we want to encourage you guys if you are interested in jumping in anytime throughout. Go ahead and ask questions, and we are more than happy to get you on if you've got something interesting, even a comment to say, if you've got some good ideas to offer, anything along that line. We're happy to have you comment or be involved with what we're doing. Make sure you hit like and subscribe on YouTube. That helps us with our analytics and promoting the show, so that's always a good thing. All right. So Frank, before we dive into the school stuff and the education piece that you're doing, why don't you tell folks, where you're from originally, how you came here to San Diego, and just sort of how that background maybe plays into uh, the the involvement you're with socially with these different groups you're in.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I actually born in China and immigrated into the United States of America back in 2005. The first city I lived in was Dallas, well, Plano, Texas, close to Dallas. And I moved into San Diego in 2009 because of work. And I found a job here and got the company sponsor my green card, and then I uh, stayed here, and this is a beautiful place, and I
That's
like
very
here.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I started to get involved into local politics back in 2014 when the SCA 5, which is Senate Constitution Amendment 5, was introduced in the state Senate. So basically, that's going to amend the Proposition 209. And the Proposition 209, it read as the state shall not discriminate against or grant preferential treatment to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in the operation of public employment, public education, and public contracting. So when I saw the legislators try to amend or even repeal this entire section, I was uh, I was surprised or stunned. So that's how I started to get involved since 2014, and all the way until now, it's all about no discrimination and no preferential treatment.
Mm. Yeah, so you've been pretty politically active in terms of some of your involvement with the Prop 16 stuff, some of your actions there in the past, but that's sort of led you more towards an educational piece, at least with some of the work you're doing at your center. So maybe tell us a little bit about the educational piece that you're working on and how why that's folks listening might want to be aware of what you're doing there.
Sure. So first of all, uh, I heard one legislator tell me that if there is one thing that can unite the Asian Americans, which I belong to, uh, that's education. So that's how I started from education pieces. And and I also have the comparison between 2014 movement and the 2020 movement. I can see stark differences between those, 6 years. The legislators, especially the Democratic legislators, they are not convincible in 2020. They were listening back in 2014. Regarding this topic. So that made me wonder what happened. What happened in the political world, and I finally realized that the education contributed a lot to this political landscape change. The reason is our public education system has already produced a lot of so-called activists instead of providing true education to our next generations, and that
Mhm.
changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
What's what I was going
Leroy,
to say is what's interesting is um, that you weren't dissuaded by the what the seeming difficulty of getting legislation changed, that you really stepped right into it and that you really saw it as an opening to try to achieve something. Why do you think that is? And do you think that that you can offer some insight into other Americans who might be looking at it in the same way?
So your question is about why these legislators were not willing to change in
Well, not so
2020.
much why they were not willing to change. I think that when people see them as not willing to change, that they think that that's the end of their involvement. But you chose to get more involved rather than to see it as an end of involvement.
Oh yeah. So since I have in 2020, I have been worked on this issue for 6 years, and when the legislators rejected or refused to take any advices on this issue, and we had to get into a statewide proposition campaign, which is Proposition 16. So for me, it's like, okay, now that we have a campaign, we have to run it. The legislators run a yes campaign, and we run a no campaign, and let's see how it goes. So I had no choice, and I'm glad that we got some Proposition 209 veterans, including Ward Connolly, Gail Heriot, all these big names. Uh, and eventually we won, and we won by like 57.2 versus 42.8%. And it's an even bigger margin than when Proposition 209 was passed. So that makes me think, wait a minute, looks like these elites are disconnected, or out touch with the average voters. So what happened? So that's how we started the Californians for Equal Rights Foundation right after the campaign.
Yeah, yeah, that's neat that you guys had such success and you got majorly outspent. And I think the encouragement people should get from that kind of thing is that when we face a lot of these issues and challenges, we are, whether it's in the school board issues that we're going to talk about, in elections and in just any election cycle, is that, if we can be educated and if we can help other people understand the issues at play, it doesn't require as much money as we think it might. You can defeat the people who have deep pockets and bigger access to more resources, those sorts of things. It can be done because you guys did it. So I hope folks. I think that's one of the reasons why it's good to have you on here. Is that it's sort of an encouraging story for folks who can maybe feel overwhelmed by this whole process, to know that they don't have to be intimidated. They just have to kind of have a conviction about what they want to do, and then take some action on that, and things can work out in a positive way for sure. So that's good for them. So let's get a little bit to what you're doing then, on the foundation side. So when you are running your work for Californians for Equal Rights Foundation, it's a 501c3. So if people want to,
Yes.
by the way, and I popped up the link a little bit earlier. There's a link in the comments section on the YouTube side, for folks that want to have a direct link. It was scrolling across there, but there's also a link in the comments section there of the video. I'll pop it up again just for the link on the YouTube side, just so people can see that comment again, and get that link. But you're doing a lot of, you're focused on education as opposed to, it's not quite the same as the Prop 16 when you're involved with that. That was more direct political action. This work now is focused more on an educational piece. So tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about your shift into the education piece and what your goals are for educating folks here in San Diego.
Sure. So before that, I want to add on one point to what you commented. Yeah, even though we were outspent by the yes side, we still won, especially for this topic, because you know it's like people want to be fairly treated, no matter what our skin color is, our race is. This
Mm-hmm.
is like common sense. So that makes much easier for us to communicate with average voters, average people. And even though the other side try to use so-called researchers, so-called very complicated theories
Mm-hmm.
uh, to say that no, you guys are racist, even though you guys are really want to treat people equally, but you know the truth still prevails. So,
Yeah.
that gives me confidence. So regarding what we do on the educational pieces, so we figured out that in the current public education system, especially in California, uh, this public schools have already been transformed to uh, some sort of political action entities. So in their websites, they frequently noted that they would like our next generation students to be socially and politically activists. So that's not the purpose. That's not the original purpose for our public schools. So
Mm-hmm.
that's very worrisome. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the
And
real
what we
problem then
do,
you've seen, right? That's the real problem. Is
yeah,
the problem you're trying to solve is that the goal of education has become social activism as opposed to equipping students with the schools in math and English and history so that they can learn to think for themselves and so that they can learn to take action. And it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be activists, in their life, if they should be passionate about things and take action. But historically, the challenge is, hey, let's educate students to learn, to think, to grow, mature, and then they can choose where they're going to be active in that. And what you're saying is you've seen that shift to a less emphasis on equipping students with those intellectual skills that they need to survive, in the practical skills and more on just like turning them into activists who may not actually understand very deeply the issues they're being, taking action on, right? I mean, that's the challenge.
Hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned, kids in the schools should be taught about how they think and be equipped with the capability of how they can have their critical thinking. But right now, the kids in the public schools, they are on the opposite. I have a personal experience. I had three webinars in last summer break in 2001. Oh no, 2021, and I talked with like over 140 high school students. And you know what? Only one of those high school students expressed to me that he does not believe there's systemic racism in the United States of America, and all other students just firmly believe, or dare not to say, or firmly believe that there are systemic racism in the United States of America, and some others may not be there to say the opposite. So that's a problem that I would say that's kind of indoctrination I saw in China. And say
Mm.
in China, nobody can say Chinese Communist Party is not good, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably the similar percentage I see here. So that's a problem, and I feel very worried about this.
Mm.
It reminds me of the statement where the critical race theorists attempt to say, well, critical race theory isn't being taught in the classroom, but the reality is they're not teaching the tenets of critical race theory. What they're teaching is the outworking, the practice of critical race theory, and what they're doing is they're teaching kids to think in critical racial terms rather than first understanding what the categories are. The categories meaning what's actually right mean, what's good mean, what's true, what's beautiful, how to add and subtract, and what they're attempting to do is to shortcut all that to teach them to think in terms of race and racism and societal issues. I mean, things that they should talk about when they get to college. But these high school years and these kindergarten and these grade school years are the formative years in which they're really learning how to think. And what I think you're saying is that the teachers are somewhat interrupting that.
Exactly. I had a first-hand experience when I worked with the Powell Unified School District, the associate superintendent of learning services. That's Osborne, uh, or Carol Osborne. So, she denied that the Powell Unified School District is teaching critical race theory, just as you said, Leroy. But when I talked with her, and do you believe in anti-racism? And she has no problem to admit it. And for the school district, they have no problem to promote a teacher to be the teacher of the year in 2021, just because that teacher promoted the anti-racism movement, the anti-racism task force in Del Norte High School.
Mm.
So they're doing this, but just not under the name, explicitly critical race theory, but every single element, like
Hmm.
systemic racism, white fragility, your identity, and anti-racism, everything inside it, they adopt it.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a shell game that people need to be aware of. And so it's like it's true, but it's not true when they say it. So when they say they're not teaching critical race theory in the schools, they're right in the sense of there's not a section of the history book that says critical race theory, turn to chapter 4 and there's a title. They're not turning to their English books and saying, now, oh, turn to this book on this. They're not, but the educators are educated in this. They have conferences that I know you've seen, we've seen, where they're teaching, where teachers are being told how to integrate these principles into every one of their courses, even into their math courses, into their science courses, into their every one of these courses from kindergarten up. Essentially, the teachers are equipped to understand how do you train these kids to think these certain ways that are compatible. And so I think in truth, it's funny because I think a lot of the teachers, one of the reasons why we've seen this big, like all of a sudden shift, like in the whoa, all of a sudden it's like everywhere. Wow, what's going on? I think truthfully, a lot of the teachers who have taught this over the years didn't even realize that they had embraced critical race theory. They just, because they were taught in colleges where the principles were just, you know, integrated to their curriculum, and they didn't even realize what they were learning. And now all of a sudden, when they hear the name, they're like, "Oh, okay, well that makes sense because that's what I learned in college. That's what I learned back in those days." So, when I was in school, so it just fits with their existing worldview because they learned the principles, and that's what's happening with our young people, is they're learning the principles of
Yeah,
it, but they're not being taught critical race theory, and so it's a little bit of a shell game that's being played. And I think that's the
yeah,
awareness that you're trying to bring in some of your education. These other words like anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, social emotional learning. I think those are some of the other names that you've come across. Uh, what are some of the when parents? Let me ask you this on the education side. So when parents are having conversations with their kids, because this isn't, people need to realize that their kids are learning some of these things all the time. Is there is there a question that they could ask that you've thought of, or is there something that a conversation they could start with their kids that would help them know, have they been not necessarily even indoctrinated, but just opened up to these ideas in some way? Is there an insight that you've figured out, like a little, like, parents, what can they ask? Have they? Is there
yeah,
some?
yeah,
Is there some tips that you could give?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, as you has just mentioned, the school districts right now, they are even try to uh, inject the idea of critical race theory even into math. So I want every single parent to be aware of the new math framework introduced in the state level. Uh, it's going to receive the public comments. If you look into that framework, you will see like 5% of math, and the others are all about critical race theory under the name of equity, about so because of the goal of equity, so we need to hold everyone back. Will not provide some advanced math track until 10th graders, and even in the math problems, they will inject some ideas about the critical race theory. So that's insane.
Mm,
In regards of the question for the parents to discuss with their kids, I think it can start with some open questions like, how do you think about George Washington? And how do you think about America? Do you think America is a racist country comparing to the other countries in the world? So that will open the mind to the students, I believe, because so many students right now they just talk with me saying that George Washington is a racist, Columbus is a racist, everyone is racist, and America is built on some uh, built on slavery and bad treatment, cruel treatment to some other people, and not because of our great idea, our Judeo-Christian value.
mhm,
So as long as you started from there, and the students will have no problem to share their worldview about the our country, about these heroic figures, and that will be a good starting point for
mm.
the parents to start this topic. And this is a hard topic.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, oh gosh, there's so many. Yeah, just asking what they think about those historic figures. I think that's a great question. Um,
Columbus.
Columbus, what they think about him, his mission. I think if the kids are older, maybe in high school, you could probably ask them, what do they think about capitalism versus other economic systems like socialism or communism. because in
Yes.
their political classes, when they're doing those sort of things, they're probably, if they're being shaded in that direction towards critical theory type ideas, they'll realize that they'll be taught things like all capitalism is a form of white supremacy or racism. There's something that's going to come across in those things that it's inherently evil or corrupt, and we need a whole new system. And as
Yeah,
Christians, though, we have to acknowledge, yeah, sure, capitalism can be abused just like any system can,
sure.
because there's sin in the world. But the idea that somehow, the savior of the world will be communism or socialism is certainly, if I had to pick any other systems, those would not be the ones to replace
Right.
capitalism with. Um,
Yeah.
I, so
Well,
go ahead, Leroy.
So what I,
obviously,
yeah, what I,
go ahead, Frank.
yeah, go ahead.
No, you
Yeah,
go,
what
Frank.
I heard is, uh, capitalism. This is my education from when I was in China. Uh, so the concept I got is capitalism probably is not the best system in the world, but
Mm-hmm.
it is not the worst, or I don't know how to. So basically, uh, still the best, uh, even though it has some deceptions. Uh, so
Oh, interesting.
and,
And that's what you
and
learned
from
when you
the
were in China.
yes, because
Oh, okay, interesting.
when I was in the student age, the China is pretty was pretty open to
Oh,
many
okay.
ideas. Yeah, but not before I was born, and not right now. So it's quite different.
Mhm.
I feel like God blessed me into a uh, good stage, so that
Yeah.
I can embrace the ideas, and even accept Jesus Christ as my savior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
I
know a
think
lot of
you.
people have done missions to China, and that's was open for a while. Now it's closed again. So I think that same kind of openness and closure is just that site. That was a little brief period. And that's a challenge. Yeah, Leroy, jump in, man.
I was going to say, I think you point out something very interesting, that what our kids are really facing is not training in thinking, but training in emotion. Because
Yeah.
for the most part, they're not really equipped to think through, you know, the difficulties that one segment of people suffer in the school. Yeah, you can show them that they're suffering, and they can, and that suffering can actually be real, and we can say that suffering is bad, and kids can agree with that. But when you begin to discuss why that suffering exists, it's very difficult to tell kids that part of that suffering that they're experiencing is because of the decisions that they've made, and that as an adult uh, we need to suffer some consequences for bad decisions so that we don't continue to make them and then have to depend on other people to bail us out, so to speak. But it seems to me that teachers today are not interested in that accountability, responsibility aspect. They're really interested in changing the country into a victim class.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you that, basically in the under the tenet of critical race theory, they discredit the scientific method, what you just mentioned. I have a live example in San Diego Union High School District. There was a racial slur painted on the wall on the campus of San Diego Academy. I think the reasonable response is just condemn it and pen it back. That's about it, and try to find the individual who is responsible for that, right? But instead, some activists, including some teachers, some students, they cry to the school district board for school district wide uh, diversity, equity, and inclusion training to address this racial slur.
Mm-hmm.
So how can they connect this incident to the solution? There's so that's a very uh, I would say very concerning and very interesting that they push to uh, that edge.
Mm. Yeah, every single incidence is in that worldview reinforces that it's a global thing. It's a very inductive reasoning process. They go from very specifics to global pictures, but But then anytime there is counter evidence, well, that's just simply dismissed because it doesn't fit with the global narrative, and it's very
Hmm.
difficult to break through that. Have you sort of challenges have you have you run into parents or people? I'm not talking about the teachers or the activists and stuff like that. I mean, they've been they've reacted and how they're going to react in terms of either denying it's taught or just kind of concealing it, which we've seen across the country is really been the method here. To kind of conceal it long enough just so they can keep going. But when you talk with parents and local groups, have you seen have they been able to make the distinction, I guess is what I'm saying, between like, yes, racism happens, it's there, but we can't go to this next step that it's built into every system and the whole system has to be torn down. Are parents able to see that distinction, do you think? Or are people that aren't educated in these things able to make those discerning kind of observations? What's been the
You know
response?
what? You know what? I think many parents and many community members can see through this stuff. But the problem right now is the extremist leftists. They are so loud, and they try their every possible effort to silence these voices. So,
Mm,
uh, so the parents or community members are, uh, con- kind of scared to speak up. So because they do not want to be labeled as racist just because of they don't agree
mm,
with the systemic racism idea, and it, they do not want to lose their job, and it happens, and even in local, uh, one uh, one scientist uh, with Salk Institute. He just expressed that he does not agree with everything about the Black Lives Matter movement, and he was fired back in
mm,
2020. So, so that makes people worry, and I can tell you that makes me very concerned as well, because when I first came into the United States, I know the difference between mayor here and the mayor back in China. The major difference is the mayor in China can, you know, they can ask police officers to raid your house. They can they can ask the court to prosecute you and and verdict you, and they
mm,
can ask the newspaper, the media uh, to smear on you. But majors here in the United States, they do not have this power. But right now, everything is different because the the troop of the diversity, equity, and inclusion, or the troop of critical race theory, right now they have this power. They
mm,
have the media as their ally. They have the big company CEOs as their ally. They can make you lose job, and and you have no way uh, uh, to get your side of story published in the media. And
Yeah.
and if we allow the court system to be occupied by these guys, controlled by these guys, we are in big trouble, and we cannot let this happen. So I will encourage every one of us, just try your best to speak up, and that's
yeah.
the only thing we can do right now.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily an understanding issue or an education issue purely because a lot of people know it's almost like a boldness issue. It's a there's a
Yes.
fear that's being instilled in a lot of people that if you stand up, you're going to lose your job. Your kids will be punished. It's like let me give people an analogy. I mean, my son was on a sports team, and I won't say which son and what sport because that would be bad. Even though he's yeah, I won't say anything more. So one of my kids, one of my three sons, was involved with the sport, and his coach was, pretty vicious. I think. I mean, maybe back in the '80s when I was young, he would be a standard coach. He's like, the Bobby Knight kind of coach. For those of us old
Mhm.
enough to remember the fiery sort of, coach throwing the f bombs and calling kids names and doing that sort of stuff. But it's pretty much not acceptable today. But you know I and my son didn't. This son didn't respond very well to that kind of thing. I actually don't have a problem with coaches that are intense, or even though I personally don't like the language or those sorts of things. I'm like, that's life, whatever. Get over it. Teach them to be tougher, kind of whatever. Um, but in this particular case, my son is not very responsive to that, and if I had a great relationship with the coach, I could have said, hey, would you go and hey, the kid doesn't respond well to this. Think about this, whatever, or complain to an administrator or something like that. But I couldn't because I knew that it would be taken out on him by this coach. He would, you know, he'd really basically he'd probably say to my face, oh, yeah, I totally get it. But then he would really turn abusive towards my kid. So, I didn't ever resolve that issue. I didn't ever bring it up because I was afraid that my son would bear the punishment for that sort of, confrontation with this guy because the way he is. And I kind of get the sense that that's what's really happening here is that, everyone talks about openness and inclusive. We want all ideas. But as soon as you run against it, you realize that that's not really what's being talked about here, because people are bullied, people are intimidated, they are punished if they go against the what the institutions have said. And I think that's a real concern, that I hear what you're saying, and I think the importance of what you guys are doing at your foundation to try to educate people. So,
Yeah, I think
um, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's ironic. And if you look at all the school district board meetings and communication letters from the school districts, they always say, we want to have this education, including the ethnic studies, which always about critical race theory, to make all students to feel safe in the campus. But the reality is, the more they push this agenda, the more students do not feel safe to express their ideas. And even the
Mm,
teachers, they do not dare to share their opinions safely at all. So it's completely the opposite. I would say this is just you know, that kind of propaganda I have been seeing in China for a long time, and this is
mm.
happening here in the United States of America. And
Yeah,
very
it's one of
sad.
the big differences I've seen, from folks who have been raised, especially amongst the Chinese folks that I know, those that have been raised or grew up in China and have seen sort of either old enough to see the sort of Maoist China or seen some of the recent trends and experienced that versus, second generation, Chinese Americans or Asian Americans that are here and have gone through our school system, and they see it very differently. And it's not a racial difference; it's a worldview difference based on their experience and where they've been educated. And people are bullied into thinking, oh, well, if you disagree, it's because it's a racist disagreement. But no, it's the people I know, like you and some other close friends who have grown up in those circumstances, that are here, who left China because of those things. Those are the ones that are most concerned about these issues
Yeah,
because they're like,
exactly.
we've seen this movie,
Yeah.
we've seen how this
Yeah.
ends, and it's not good. Oh
And you know what? Many of my fellow parents, they are immigrants from from Russia, from Poland, from East European countries,
mm,
and they shared because just as you said, they saw the movie played, and they
yeah,
didn't they don't want to have happen here again. So
yeah. Like, we left that. Why do want to go back by having things change here? So I think that's something that
yeah.
people need to be aware of. Have a lot of people come to you privately, like teachers or people that are in authority, just saying, expressing, "Hey, we're behind you, but we're afraid." Have you seen that
Yes.
personally?
A
Yeah.
lot. I would say a lot. In San Diego Unify, in Power Unify, San Diego, uh, teachers, parents, they reach out to me. They said, okay, we can be a whistleblower, but you have to
Mm,
find out the information by yourself. And
Mm.
sometimes it even lose some credibility because if you do not have a real name under the claim, it just hurts the credibility. So that's a problem.
mm.
And
Yeah, I
that
go
fear
ahead, Leroy.
is the fear is pretty real. It is, it's the reason why when people look at the current legislature and the way that it's constructed, and they get a no, that they don't really want to push through to the next point to really to be active, because they're afraid of what happens to them when they become active. And what's really, this is the part that really interested me with you, is that when you got that pushback, it wasn't a I'm going to be afraid, I'm not going to move forward in this. No, that was actually for you an opportunity to actually take a step forward. Now you've told me where the weak point is. Let's go ahead and see if what you guys are suggesting, which is that everybody agrees with you, is correct. I mean, I think that fear for a lot of folks is very difficult to overcome.
Yeah, yeah. But what I want to let everyone knows is, if we allow them to uh, to prevail, and we will soon experience more violence, and it
Mm,
will be more fear than now. So if we do not want our next generations to fall into chaos, fall into violent, uh, you know, conflicts, I will encourage every one of us, just try your best to your capacity to speak up, and just simply express that you do not agree with that idea, and that
mm,
should be enough. You know, I joined a one diversity, equity, and inclusion committee meeting, and I saw, other than the teachers and the principals and the DEI director of the school district, all the other parents, they're on our side,
mm.
but none of them can, you know, speak speak up.
Yeah.
And well, but they just express, okay, I think you should focus more on academic teaching. You know, do not talk too much on diversity, equity, inclusion, uh, and that helps. That helps, even
Yeah.
though,
Yeah, and I want to transition a little bit in some of our time left too about some of what you're personally doing outside of the education piece with your foundation. But I just want to reinforce the folks is if they're tuning in and aren't aware of all these terms, because this isn't a really show we're defining all this stuff. We're not really getting into a lot of detail. I know through Frank's group, I've put that link in the YouTube comments there. You can find his foundation is linked there, and then you can at morethancake.org. You can see the archives. We have show notes. We have links to all of his pages there as well. And Leroy and I've done other shows on this. So there's a lot of things to educate yourself on what these ideas mean. But I do want to say this for folks maybe just coming in the middle of this to understand is that when you hear those words, diversity, equity, inclusion, they sound like really good words. Like they sound like things that we would all agree with. And to a large part, it's not that we don't think diversity is a good thing, or equality, which is different than equity, is a good thing, or including people in things. But these have very specific meanings that are not what you think they are, is what we're trying, what people need to understand. And again, we can't unpack all those in this show, but Frank is, you've seen with his Asian American group here, he's all about equal treatment, ending discrimination and racial bigotry against Asian Americans. Leroy is a black dude. He's been interested in not being, in making sure that racist folks don't have, control or intimidate him and his life. People care about those things. We all care about those. I care about those things. But when you hear us saying our concern about these things, just because we're using these labels, again, the concern isn't because of the sounding good parts. There's parts of it that are very nefarious and control oriented that we have to be cautious of. And that's what our concern is here. But Frank, the nice thing about you is that you're working to educate people. You're actually taking action through the organizations you're connected with. You're going around, you're speaking, you're doing stuff. But on a personal level, you're doing some other stuff outside the work of your foundation that I think people need to be aware of, but also, just so they could maybe, see you as a model in the sense of like, okay, here's somebody who's willing to stand up. So tell about the folks, the office you're running for, where that is, and what's going on with what you're trying to do in your local school boards.
oh, sure. So uh, for diversity, equity, and inclusion, I want to add one more point
Go for it.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, diversity. when they mention diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity always means about diversity of skin color instead of diversity of thoughts. So that's a problem. And I right now always equate the diversity, equity, and inclusion committees as the CCP committees in China. In every single business unit, in every single like school district, they are very alike. They act very alike. And I cannot expand this topic anymore, but if you have any interest, feel free to reach out to me. So other than the my service in this foundation, I myself is running for Palomar College Board school district, school district trustee. So I believe we have to, the like-minded people have to take back the school districts so that we can disband this diversity, equity, and inclusion committees in colleges, in school districts, because these do not give us any benefit, and it will only distort the purpose of the college, the purpose of the school districts, and even the purpose of the business units. If you do not know, in Hollywood, they have a lot of so-called diversity hiring, and that's why right now all the movies we saw right now is so woke, because because they do not care about actual audience. They care about they have to be political correct. So that's the problem, and I believe in the long run it will hurt the profit of the Hollywood business. And that's the same thing in the school districts. If we allow it to happen forever, it will hurt our true education to our next generations. So I myself running for the school district, and I encourage every one of you, if you are called by the Lord, please run for school district as well, and I can fight along with you. I got some help from outside organizations, political action committees, so we can fight together. And you have to be realizing that this is a voluntary position, even though it's an elected official, and no compensation, but you still have to do a lot to make the school district run right, because you have to face the opposition from the teachers union.
Yeah, and that's a big hurdle for a lot of people. Realize, okay, this is a non-paid position or whatever, but that's being traded on by some of the powers that be, because they realize that a lot of times the best people may not go out for these things because they're working for a living. They're trying to make things happen, and the people that they're able to get into these roles are people that that they align with, but you know in terms of their ideology, but who are don't care about those other concerns or don't have those concerns that maybe some of people listening. So this means that people that are maybe empty nesters, that their kids are graduated, or that they are retired military folks, people that aren't concerned about maybe that would be great candidates for these kinds of roles in their community, because they don't have that hurdle. It's not that other people
Yeah.
shouldn't do it. It's just that if that's a massive hurdle for you, help locate some people that isn't a hurdle for, and get behind them. And I know, Frank, you can help connect people and organize people. I think there are other groups you can connect them with, like you said, so people realize you're not alone in this, which is why we want to have you on here. And we're obviously talking in San Diego, but I know across the nation there are people just like Frank Shu, and just uh, that are just as concerned, and they're taking these kinds of actions. There's political action committees. There are independent groups that are cropping up all over, trying to help get good candidates into these local school board elections for both the community colleges and high schools, and K through 12 schools. This is really one of those frontline battle things that people can make a big difference, right? I mean, people worry about the president and Senate and Congress at the federal level, and those matter. But man, if they want to make a difference, this is a great place to start, right? I mean, this is there's some real action that can be taken at these levels that'll make a difference. Don't you think?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we have lost the education field for decades and
Mm,
to the critical race theory and these uh, troops. So I believe the biggest swing state actually is not one of our 50 states, it's our next generation.
mm,
So so we have to expose our next generations to di- diversity of thoughts, of different
hmm
ideas, so that they can make their own informed decision about their life.
mm,
So, so that's very important, and that's why I'm so dedicated to educations right now, and also for myself and uh, running for school district board because I want the college to be as apolitical as possible, just focus on the skills that can help them on the career and the the character that will help them prevail in their career so they can compete with the others. So that's the importance.
mm, mm. That's for sure. Yeah, we got comment there from actually that's my wife, so she's actually watching. That's good. Say thank you, Frank, for the good words, the good works you're doing. So it gets support of my wife, so you're all right then. It must be all right. So Leroy,
Thank you, Susan.
yeah, Leroy, any thoughts, questions from you
Yeah,
before we start wrapping things up?
I'm just excited for this reason that um, someone decided to push back and make it and show the rest of us that you can make a difference. And and it just takes a real desire to step out into that spot and not be afraid to to risk something, because if you risk something you can win something that benefits the rest of us and benefits the next generation. And I think that's what most of us really want. So I'm really happy to have talked to you today, and I feel inspired even just being a part of the conversation.
Thank you, Leroy. And I believe as a Christian, we all believe that we have the biggest gift from our Lord. So uh, anything lost here in this world is nothing to us.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those You're right. In that worldview, that perspective, being able to realize that, this is we're visitors in this world, we're stewards of this planet, and all the things that can be taken away from us are not the things that matter the most in God's eyes. So, encouraging our Christian brothers and sisters to stand up for what's right for the next generation, for their kids and their grandkids. That's really key to so that we're not allowing ourselves to be intimidated by what's going on. And so, uh, Frank, just to remind people the organization you're with, where they can find you. I know I've again reminding folks, if for those watching live on YouTube, if the video's been kind of embedded in another site, which it can do, just click on the link to the YouTube side. You can then you can see in the comments section a lot of these links and click right onto them through the comments that have been posted here. Also, click and like and subscribe to the YouTube channel itself. That'd be great. But just remind folks verbally what they can search for and find you at, where they can find you and connect with you and follow up or get help from you.
Oh, yeah, our website is www.cferfoundation.org, www.cferfoundation.org. And
Okay.
thank you, Joe and Leroy, for me today.
Yeah, and you got a lot of good folks involved there that I've seen. I haven't met them all. We've only met you once before this, but we're glad to kind of get to know you a little bit more on this in this forum. Appreciate everybody watching, tuning in. Please be sure to share this around. Connect with Frank's group, and we know that we can make a big difference. So don't be discouraged. Don't let the news get you down. Probably stop watching the news. Read the news. Don't watch the news is always the big thing. Too much emotional manipulation on watching it. But read news, be aware of stuff, be educated, but then also take action, because that way we're not giving into the depression that the world would like to force on us. So thanks again, Frank, Leroy. Thanks for tuning in, and work through all the techno problems. I'm glad you got that solved. Leroy's been having so many the last couple shows, transitioning where his living arrangements are at, and it's been miserable, but we fought through it. We made it. So, all right, folks, tune in another time. We'll get another show. Leroy and I are going to try to get a little more regular with our off the cuff. I've just finished through with my PhD stuff, so I have a little more time. Leroy has to finish his thesis for his THM. So, but we're going to try to get a little more regular through the first part of this year. So just be praying for us, and we'll hope to see you around. Take care, everyone. God bless.